It's May 26, 1990, in Wellington, Florida. Marlene Warren is at home when someone comes to her doorstep. But not just anyone, a random clown. This clown came with a white painted face, an orange-red nose, and wild, bright orange hair. And the clown's holding balloons and flowers like it's some sort of nice gesture. Naturally, Marlene opens the door and says warmly, "Oh, what a nice surprise." But before she can get up and get anything else in the room, she is shot through the head fatally, and this clown simply turns around, leaves the house, gets into a white LeBaron, and drives away, as if no big deal. So exactly what happened that day? Who is this clown? And why did this clown murder Marlene so planfully? You see, there are too many questions already, but answers we will investigate. Marlene was considered the angel of a lady. She didn't have any known enemies. She lived in a quiet, secluded part of Palm Beach County with her husband, Michael Warren, who was a businessman in the car industry. Like many other marriages from the outside, their marriage looked solid, but people close to them knew things weren't perfect. And that's when the investigators started to turn their focus toward Michael and a woman named Sheila Keen, who was having an affair with him. She was in the repossession business, and everyone had seen her out with Michael. So, yeah, some serious suspicion started. But Michael had an alibi, which was enough to stall the police in taking any steps immediately. Otherwise, it was a shocking event that grabbed everyone's attention. A shooting in the middle of the day, with a killer dressed as a clown. Marlene's son, Joe Aarons, was at home that day. He was recovering from a broken leg. He was with his mom and some friends when that clown showed up. They all thought it was just a friendly visit at first, balloons and flowers and all that. But when Marlene opened the door and the shot was fired, Joe instantly called 911 while his friends tried to get a better look at the clown. But by that time, the clown just walked away and casually drove off in that white LeBaron. Joe tried chasing the car, but he couldn't keep up. His mother was rushed to the hospital. However, 2 days later, she died on life support. This loss of his mom hit Joe very hard and changed everything in his life. He was even able to describe some essential aspects to the police, like this clown was almost 6'1" in height, with orange-colored hair, had a red big nose, and a gigantic smiling face. Then there were details about the car and balloons. These contained the odd messages written on them saying, "You are the greatest," and even showed a Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs theme. He remembered these all as if clues, but ultimately it reached to a dead end. And eventually, the investigation went cold. It went back into cold files for many years. But after over 30 years, finally the truth was revealed. Authorities started again with Michael. They determined Mike Warren, Joe's stepfather, had an alibi at the time of the shooting. He was in a car with some friends on his way to the racetrack. Joe's parents, Marlene and Mike, had been together since Joe was 3. They had built a pretty good life in Wellington, Florida. Marlene owned a few businesses, including apartment complexes. She and Mike ran a used car and rental business called Bargain Motors. But despite their success, their marriage was rocky. Marlene had this instinct that Mike was cheating on her and made her scared of him. She even told Joe that if anything happened to her, it would be at Mike's hand. She repeated the same words to her mother, Shirley Twing. Shirley believed that Mike could have murdered her daughter when she discovered that Marlene had indeed been murdered. She knew his alibi. As the investigation continued, so did tips that began leading to Sheila Keen, whom investigators suspected was Mike's lover. People who worked at Bargain Motors with Mike, like Della Ward, all said Mike was a real softie, and that made him popular amongst the ladies, with Sheila being one of the standouts. Della further said you could totally see the chemistry between Mike and Sheila. She was a tough girl working for Bargain Motors as a repo woman, not exactly an easy job. She even said that she carried a gun for protection when repossessing cars, which only added to the fact that she was a very tough, unafraid person. And she became a major person of interest in the case. She claimed to have been out looking for cars to repo the day Marlene was murdered. However, when investigators asked for addresses where they had repossessed vehicles that day, she couldn't remember it. Sheila and Mike told the police they were only friends, but the neighbors in Sheila's apartment complex were more convinced. They were sure that Mike and Sheila were lovers. Now the thing is, just because they were seeing each other doesn't mean that Mike is going to kill his wife. You see, Marlene's properties and all her assets were in her name. When she dies, everything comes over to Mike, but then detectives brought up something odd. A clown costume was purchased recently. 2 nights before the murder, someone went to a costume shop and purchased a clown suit, wig, makeup, and a red nose for cash. And the woman who purchased those was described as tall, with dark long hair, brown eyes, and about 5 feet 10 inches. The shop worker, Deborah Offord, later picked Sheila Keen out of a photo lineup as the possible buyer. There was also a supermarket employee who remembered a customer buying flowers and balloons, and that customer matched Sheila's description too. So things were starting to add up. There were a few key things that still raised eyebrows and got investigators zeroing in on Sheila. First off, there was the affair she was having, the weird costume she bought, and the odd supermarket transaction. With all that swirling, the investigation started to pick up steam, and before long, new evidence came to light. Detectives came upon an abandoned white Chrysler LeBaron that sounded like the one witnesses said he got away in. They found something odd when they looked through it. Orange synthetic fibers of the type, say, which come from clown wigs. That was pretty big, as it matched up with what Joe Aarons reported. And for good measure, they also spotted a brown human hair that would match Sheila Keen's quite closely. But they didn't stop there. The sheriff's team broke into Sheila's place, and sure enough, in her closet, they found orange fibers. Forensics proved that these were again identical to those found on the LeBaron. They even matched her hair to one inside the car. However, this is where it gets interesting. DNA testing back in 1990 was not as prevalent or taken to the level that it is today, so they could not connect a piece of full evidence yet. There were still a few things that didn't add up, though. The killer's gun and costume were never discovered, and the descriptions of the clown did not exactly match Sheila. People saw the killer for just a second, so their details were all over the place. All of this notwithstanding, the police were still not ready to make an arrest. They felt there was still a lot more to find, so they dug deeper and found something shocking. They were looking for a connection between Mike Warren's business, Bargain Motors, and the Chrysler LeBaron. Turns out one of Mike's employees had stolen the car weeks before the murder. Investigators spent 5 hours digging through Bargain Motors, uncovering all sorts of fraud going on there, which led to Mike's conviction. But they could not find any direct link to the murder, so again he never faced charges for Marlene's death. Mike kept saying he was a victim too, and even suggested that maybe Marlene was killed by some angry tenant or customer. But this is a ridiculous theory. Law enforcement wasn't buying it. But as the months went by, the case started to cool down and Sheila's name faded from the spotlight. However, Joe, Mike's son, didn't let it go. After his stepdad went to prison, Joe was lost. He turned to alcohol and drugs, especially on the anniversaries of his mom's death. He'd visit her grave, hoping to find some answers, but they never came. Eventually, he kicked his addictions and became convinced that Sheila was the one who had killed his mom. On the other hand, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office continued to dig into the case, and finally, in 2017, the cold case unit finally got a big break. They used DNA tech to match hairs found in the suspected getaway car to Sheila Keen. That was the proof they needed. Detectives were now sure they could tie her to the crime. Meanwhile, there's a bizarre coincidence that Marlene used to paint a lot when she was just 14, and she had an obsession with clowns. Ironically, she also died from a clown. Fast forward 27 years, and law enforcement finally had what they needed to make a case. They tracked down Sheila Keen, and they found out something shocking. She had married someone totally unexpected. After Michael Warren got out of prison, he reconnected with Sheila. Their 2002 marriage stirred a lot of gossip, so they settled in Tennessee, where they launched a burger bar called the Purple Cow. And Sheila transformed her look completely. She began to color her hair blonde, and even took up using Debbie again, the nickname from her childhood. This was really living this new life with the dark secrets locked deep. Even she introduced herself to almost everyone as Debbie. Neighbors and Purple Cow workers, including one named Brooke Blevins, knew her as Debbie, not as Sheila. They called her a hard-nosed businesswoman. Rumors began to circulate through the staff that Sheila might be connected to the murder of Marlene, though after one of them remembered a Halloween, Sheila had gone to dress up as a clown. Then, in 2017, DNA finally cracked the case wide open, and that's when authorities finally arrested Sheila Keen and charged her with first-degree murder, 27 years after Marlene's death. Sheila's defense lawyer stuck to the claim of innocence, arguing that whoever committed the crime had to be experienced, not someone like Sheila. When Sheila was arrested, she didn't just go quietly. Instead, she pointed at her husband, Mike Warren, and asked, "Well, are you going to arrest him too?" That raised some serious eyebrows, suggesting she knew exactly why she was being taken in, and that she and Mike were in this together. Sheila's stepson, Joe, agreed, saying he believed both Sheila and Mike were responsible for killing his mom, Marlene. After Sheila got arrested, news channels attempted to speak with Mike Warren. Mike Warren refused to open the door for them, but was willing to talk through it, with a dog barking in the background. Mike sounded pretty assertive about his denial of involvement in Marlene's death, claiming that neither he nor Sheila had anything to do with it. He also dismissed the idea that he had anything to do with suggesting Sheila wear a clown costume, which was one of the main issues in the case, although they had no solid evidence to associate Mike with the crime. The investigators said that there was nothing to charge him, but the door was left open in case something new turned up. Meanwhile, the prosecutors were pretty confident about their case against Sheila. They believed that they could prove that Sheila had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill Marlene to marry Mike. He then turned to defense attorney Greg Rosenfeld, Sheila's lawyer, who was adamant that the investigation was a complete mess from start to finish, and that both the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office and the state attorney's office had botched it. Rosenfeld maintained the notion that it was Sheila, and that we'd never know the truth because it was handled so poorly. Rosenfeld also pointed out that some people who could have been suspects, but never really looked into, were inmates who supposedly bragged about killing Marlene. Prosecutors, though, said they checked the inmate out and ruled him out. They insisted the evidence kept pointing right to Sheila. Rosenfeld did not spare criticism on DNA evidence, particularly hair found in the getaway car, a LeBaron. Prosecutors said the hair could belong to Sheila, but Rosenfeld shot that down, arguing it could match about 4% of the Caucasian population in the U.S. He said that wasn't enough to tie her to the crime. His theory? Sheila worked at Bargain Motors, where the car had been, so her hair could have just gotten in there from being around it. He didn't believe that would be enough to demonstrate she was the one driving the murder car. Then there were the orange fibers found in the car, which prosecutors claimed came from a clown costume. Rosenfeld wasn't buying that either, saying the fibers were synthetic and could come from a ton of different things, not just a clown wig. He thought it was an attempt to trick the jury with shaky evidence. Over the years, Rosenfeld, who defends law enforcement cases, describes it as an enormous mess in evidence handling. Some of the evidence bags at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office were practically torn open, having huge holes in them. That can easily lead to cross-contamination. One particular example he calls out is a bag with a clown wig in it that was bought for comparison with fibers. It was improperly stored, which is a big red flag. Rosenfeld makes it clear that when evidence is messed with like this, it just isn't trustworthy. And no matter how minor the mistakes seem, the defense is going to latch onto them. Despite all of Rosenfeld's concerns about the evidence, the prosecutors are still confident about their case. But in February 2020, after taking another look at everything, they made a surprise move. They decided they wouldn't pursue the death penalty for Sheila Keen Warren anymore. Rosenfeld thinks this could mean the prosecution is starting to realize there's a chance Sheila might walk free, pointing out that they've always known a jury could see things differently. Rosenfeld really thinks the case against Sheila Keen Warren isn't as strong as the prosecution portrays it to be, and there are still so many unanswered questions about how everything was handled. The murder of Marlene Warren remained unsolved for 27 years, and Sheila Keen Warren's trial kept getting pushed back. By 2022, she would have been 5 years in the slammer awaiting trial, her case having gone through 6 delay motions, reasons ranging from COVID to piling up vast evidence, mounds of pictures, documents, and files. Defense attorney Greg Rosenfeld does not seem thrilled with how things were done. Things fall through the cracks. Important things disappear, the clown sighting file for one. It included tips that folks had spotted clowns near where the girl's body was. This document was finally found in October 2022. However, the information was of no use then, because many witnesses could not be contacted. The delays didn't make it easy for the prosecution either. Witnesses had died, memories had faded, and some key evidence, like fibers, got destroyed because it was not kept appropriately. The defense argued that all of this screwed-up evidence meant that Sheila's guilt could never be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Then, just 2 weeks before the trial was to start on April 25, 2023, a plea deal was reached. When asked by the judge, Sheila replied, "Yeah, I did it." Sheila Keen Warren pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a 12-year sentence. However, since she has already served some time, she will be out this year. Now, the shocking part is her lawyer claimed that she was actually innocent, just pleading guilty out of pressure from the system. Thanks to the plea, Sheila was convicted of murder but could get out in just 16 to 18 months, though she'll always be labeled a murderer, no matter when she's released. Her husband, Michael Warren, spoke up, saying he didn't believe Sheila actually did it. He couldn't stand seeing her plead guilty to something she didn't do, but he still backed the deal. The chance of an early release seemed like the better choice as opposed to the emotional chaos of a trial. But then comes Joe Aaron's, Marlene's son. He mourned his mother for over 30 years. The plea deal was tough to swallow, but he signed it. A trial would be too much for him to handle. So when he brought home the deal, that was how he closed that painful chapter in his life. It wasn't easy, but he just focused on the good memories of his mom rather than how she died. In life, some things are so layered that they are hard to swallow, but we still have to make peace with it. What do you think? Do you think Sheila should have been punished more, or do you think her punishment was justified? Share your thoughts in the comments below. While this was quite a mysterious murder, this next one will shake you to the core. One fateful night, a distressed woman called 911 in panic, which abruptly got cut. And then some police found her in the middle of the road, completely soaked in blood. And what they found next was terrifying. Subscribe to the channel for more true crime content in this channel. See you soon.